"You need to leave. This lounge is for actual clients." Heather Langston didn't even blink when she said it. Her voice sliced through the stillness like a knife on crystal. And in that moment, it wasn't just the volume that stung. It was the certainty that Celeste Morgan didn't belong. But here's the twist. Celeste didn't just belong there. She owned it. It's funny how people protect spaces they've never built, how they weaponize tone, protocol, and marble floors to keep someone else small. Heather didn't ask a question. She didn't check a name. She saw a black woman in a cashmere sweater and decided that presence was a threat. At 10:17 a.m. on a heavy San Diego morning, inside the glass-paneled executive lounge of Starglade Financial, those 8 words landed like a gavel, and Celeste Morgan, 46 years old, didn't flinch because she wasn't surprised. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong? Inside something you built with your own hands? Because that's where this story begins. And in the next 10 minutes, everything you think you know about power, about bias, and about silence is going to collapse right here in this very room. Stay close, because justice didn't walk in through the front doors today. She was already seated, calm, quiet, and ready. Celeste Morgan, 46 years old, walked into the branch in dark wash jeans, a pale blue cashmere sweater, and simple black loafers. She didn't look like the CEO of Morgan Capital Group, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that had acquired Starglade Financial just 2 years earlier. That was intentional. This morning was a test. She had no entourage, no handbag with a designer logo, and no flashy jewelry. She carried a slim tablet case and wore a quiet confidence. She approached the front desk and requested access to the private lounge to complete a $5,000 withdrawal. The teller directed her to the glass-partitioned room without asking a single question. But the moment she sat down, that calm shattered. Heather Langston, the branch manager, strode over like she smelled smoke and was searching for the fire. Her blonde bob swayed as she leaned over the mahogany desk. "We'll need proof of where your funds came from," she said. Her tone was flat, but her eyes were cold. Celeste didn't flinch. She'd seen this before. It was the same look she got at 23 when her account was frozen for unusual activity after depositing her first real estate commission. The same look she saw at 26 when a loan officer called her high risk even though she'd brought in 30% more collateral than required. And now, 2 decades and $8 billion later, here it was again. Celeste calmly opened her tablet, queued up a document, and slid it across the table before Heather could glance at it. A voice interrupted. "Don't clog up the lines, sweetheart." Trevor Ashford, 45, a white investment banker in an expensive gray suit, sneered as he walked past. With one flick of his wrist, he knocked Celeste's tablet off the desk. It hit the ground with a soft thud but a loud insult. Celeste stared at him, calm and composed. Trevor didn't even look back. Brittany Hayes, 29, a private banker, stood at the far corner, arms crossed. "That amount of cash doesn't add up. You could have stolen it." Her words weren't loud, but they carried. 2 clients looked up. One raised an eyebrow. Another whispered to his companion. Celeste blinked slowly. Then she said, cool and measured, "Run my name." Heather shook her head. "You're not verified. This isn't a walk-in center." In the back corner, Miles Rennick, a 31-year-old tech entrepreneur, began filming with his phone. The red light glowed, casting a quiet spotlight on the room's unraveling dignity. "Don't," Celeste said firmly, her voice still calm. "We settle this with facts, not footage." A tall black man in a gray suit, Marcus Harlan, 40, rose from his chair and walked over to Miles. "Brother," he said softly, "put that down. This is bigger than one clip. It's about how we speak up, not how we go viral." Miles hesitated. Celeste met his eyes. "Words," she said. "Use your words." The room stilled for a moment. Danielle Avery, 28, sat silently to Celeste's left, hands clutching her purse, lips pressed in fury. She finally whispered, "This is foul." Celeste turned her head. "Speak up," she said. "Let them hear it." Danielle stood, "She's not the problem, you are," she said, pointing at Heather and Brittany. Brittany raised a brow, unamused. "STC's on standby," she muttered. Trevor, now leaning against a nearby pillar, smirked. "You all really think this woman has $500,000 sitting in an account here?" he said, half laughing. "Pawn shops down the street." He slipped a folded note across the marble floor. It skidded to a stop at Celeste's foot. Danielle bent down, picked it up, and read it aloud. "Go to a pawn shop." A collective gasp followed. One elderly white woman clutched her handbag tighter. A young Latino father with a toddler looked up from his phone. The room was no longer quiet. It was humming. "That's enough," Celeste said, her voice rising but still composed. "You're destroying this institution with every word that comes out of your mouth." Heather smirked, clearly enjoying the power trip. "You're not a client. You're a con artist. Go play rich somewhere else." Celeste took a breath, pulled out her phone, and dialed. "Anita," she said. "Start Protocol 6. On the other end, Anita Sharma, her executive assistant, didn't miss a beat. "It's ready, ma'am. You're going to regret this," Celeste said. "Not because I'll scream, not because I'll post a video, but because you just told the wrong woman she doesn't belong in the bank she owns." Heather scoffed. "Delusions don't scare me." Miles raised his phone again. Marcus stepped forward. "We do this the right way. No videos, no edits. We talk." Trevor rolled his eyes. "Security now." Heather nodded at Brittany, who pulled out a landline receiver. "Calling now," she said. "She's a fraud." Celeste didn't move, didn't flinch. She held her ground with the same stillness that once steadied her when her first property sale nearly collapsed due to a forged title. The same stillness that had guided her through 14 acquisitions and a global recession. But now it wasn't just her name or assets being challenged. It was her existence in this space, this lounge, this institution. So, before we go deeper into this story, I want to ask, if you were told to leave a place you owned, would you? Or would you do what Celeste did? Sit down, stay silent, and let the storm come to you, because the storm had already begun. "She's a fraud, Stephen. Throw her out." Heather Langston didn't whisper. She barked it loud enough for the entire private client lounge to hear, as if volume could drown out guilt. Assistant Manager Stephen Bell, 48, stepped forward reluctantly. His hands were stiff at his sides. "This woman," Heather continued, her voice rising with every syllable, "is a con artist parading around like she owns the place." Celeste Morgan turned her head slowly, unblinking. She didn't say a word yet. The marble floors, the frosted glass, the recessed lighting. None of it softened the air now thick with tension. The lounge no longer felt private, felt like a courtroom. Trevor Ashford added fuel, standing tall in his suit, jaw set. "She stole that money, and now she's here wasting everyone's time. Why hasn't she been arrested yet?" That word, stole, hit like shrapnel. Two clients near the espresso bar looked at each other, whispering. One raised his phone slightly but thought better of it. Brittany Hayes, still leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, narrowed her eyes and said with confidence, "That's stolen cash. No real client makes that kind of request, not dressed like that." Celeste, still seated, took in the comment. Her outfit faded jeans, clean but simple loafers, a soft cashmere sweater. It wasn't the armor these people expected from a millionaire. But it was intentional. It was human. It was deliberate. Danielle Avery stood up from her chair, voice shaking but clear. "Enough. You're all out of line. You don't even know her." Trevor laughed. "We know the type. She probably got someone's login and thinks she can just walk in here and drain $500,000 like it's her birthday." Stephen shifted again, clearly uneasy. His lips parted, like he wanted to say something. He didn't. Miles Rennick, still holding his phone just low enough to seem subtle, looked to Celeste. "I should be recording this." Celeste shook her head. "Words, not lenses." Marcus Harlan stood beside her, stepping closer to Miles. "Let your voice work, not your camera. If we want to change the room, we speak in it, not post about it after. Miles hesitated. You're right. But this doesn't feel real. Danielle looked around. It is. This is how they treat us. Brittany took a sharp breath. You're making a scene. Celeste's voice cut through everything like a thread of steel. You called security on me for existing. That's the only scene here. Stephen finally spoke, voice low, eyes to the floor. Do you have any account verification? The words stumbled out like they were dragging shame behind them. Celeste didn't look at him. She dialed Anita Sharma. Anita, they've escalated it. Proceed to phase 2 of Protocol 6. Anita's voice came through, steady and efficient. Confirmed. I've logged the escalation and noted the language used. Also, Heather's call to security is timestamped. Internal audit will hear this. Celeste replied. They'll hear everything, every word. Stephen straightened up slightly, caught between two worlds. His loyalty to Heather and the truth unraveling around him. Heather waved him off. Don't entertain this. She's just here to make a mess. Trevor chimed in again. She's probably filming some social stunt, trying to play victim for views. Miles stepped forward now, forgetting the camera. She's not filming. But I stopped because she asked us to speak. Not post. Maybe try listening for once. Brittany's voice cracked slightly. Security's coming. Let them deal with this. Danielle didn't sit. Security for what? A withdrawal. Heather raised her voice again. You're all being manipulated. You think someone like her walks in off the street and has access to $500,000. Wake up. Celeste turned to face her fully now. You sound afraid. That's the sound of your job slipping away. Heather hissed. Threats. That's what you're going with now. Celeste didn't blink. No, just a mirror. Anita's voice returned over the phone. Celeste, I've elevated the incident to our corporate ethics board. They're monitoring live and we've logged every biased phrase spoken within the last 3 minutes. I've also linked the 2023 Starglade acquisition documents to your profile for real-time confirmation. Celeste nodded once. Keep the line open. Heather scoffed. Corporate's not going to save your little con job. Stephen turned slowly, his voice hollow. Heather, what if she's right? Heather stared at him like he'd just betrayed her family. Don't be naive. But the cracks were showing. Celeste stood up now, steady and calm. You asked for proof of funds. You accused me of fraud. You called me a thief. You triggered a security call. You mocked the way I dressed. And you humiliated me in a room full of witnesses. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. And I'm still standing here. Why do you think that is? The silence in the room was immediate. Even Trevor folded his arms tighter. Lips pressed. Danielle walked to Celeste's side. What now? Celeste said. We wait. The truth is coming whether they want it or not. Heather folded her arms tighter. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Trevor barked. If she had money, she'd show it. You people always act entitled until someone asks for numbers. Marcus turned sharply. You people? The words echoed. Stephen sat down in one of the lounge chairs. This isn't how we should treat people. Brittany rolled her eyes. It's called protocol. Celeste spoke to Anita again. Have you started phase 3? Anita replied. Already underway. Heather's compliance reports are being pulled, and just for the note, 8 of her prior service complaints involved women of color, all filed under unverified and never escalated. It's not a good look. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, absorbing that. She had known, but hearing it laid out so clearly still hit differently. Thank you, Anita. Don't stop. Danielle's voice cracked. They're trying to erase us with policy, with tone, with fake concern for security. Celeste placed a hand on her shoulder. Not today. Heather smirked. You think your little phone call and a few tech buzzwords are going to change anything? Celeste's gaze sharpened. No, but I'm not here to change everything. I'm here to end this branch's legacy of silence. Miles murmured. Damn. Marcus nodded slowly. And this is why we don't record. Because when people speak the truth like this, it doesn't need a filter. Suddenly, Brittany stepped toward Celeste and picked up the fallen tablet from earlier. She held it in both hands, looked down at it. Then, without a word, she tossed it to the side, where it skidded across the floor and hit the base of a leather chair. "Stolen junk," she muttered. Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Was that yours to destroy or just your impulse to control?" Brittany turned her back. Stephen watched her walk away and shook his head. "She's gone too far." And in that moment, Celeste spoke again. "Every second you spend talking instead of reflecting is a second closer to the end of your employment." Heather's smile faded. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Celeste's tone sharpened. "No, I'm your reckoning. Call the police. She's a financial threat." Brittany Hayes didn't hesitate. She picked up the landline receiver and dialed fast, her voice loud enough for the whole lounge to hear as she said, "Yes, we have a woman here attempting to withdraw funds under false pretenses. High amount, possibly stolen." She didn't stutter. She sounded practiced, like this wasn't her first time. Celeste Morgan sat motionless in the center of the client lounge, her hands folded over her tablet, eyes locked forward, voice quiet but sharp. "You just made a federal false report. I hope you're ready to explain it in court." Heather Langston scoffed, arms folded, as she leaned beside the espresso machine. "Sweetheart, that's not how this works. We protect the institution, not the imposters." Her words were laced with contempt, not caution. Then she turned to Stephen Bell, the assistant manager. "Get her out now." Stephen didn't move. His eyes flicked toward Celeste, then to Brittany, then back to Heather. "She hasn't even raised her voice," he muttered. "That's what scares you, isn't it?" Trevor Ashford stepped forward, shoving his hands in his pockets, trying to fill the room with his presence. "She's laundering money, that's obvious. What beside else do you need?" He waved a platinum-colored business card in the air like it meant something. "And I'm supposed to be in the vault consultation. I'm a priority client." His voice was harsh, his tone theatrical. "This woman is nothing. This is all theater." Heather suddenly stepped behind Celeste's chair and demanded, "Show me your financial history right now. If you're legit, prove it. Open your account in front of everyone." The tone wasn't procedural. It was taunting. Celeste didn't move. She lifted her head slowly, then looked to the entryway as footsteps echoed in. The security lead, Derek Holt, 34, had arrived. He wore a Navy uniform with a Starglade Financial badge stitched tight above his heart. "What's going on here?" he asked. Brittany pointed directly at Celeste. "She's a suspected fraud. We've requested verification. She's refused. And now she's escalating the situation with her phone." Derek nodded and walked over, then stood directly in front of Celeste's seat. "I need your bag and your tablet." He didn't ask. He reached. When Celeste didn't immediately move, Derek shoved her purse off the adjacent seat and onto the floor. "You're being detained for non-compliance." Marcus Harlan, still standing near the center of the room, stepped forward. "That is not legal. She hasn't broken a single law." Danielle Avery grabbed her phone but didn't record. She simply gripped it, trembling. "This is what happens," she whispered. "Even when you sit quietly." Celeste's eyes locked on Derek's face. "Touch me again, and I will personally make sure Starglade Financial pays for it." Derek raised an eyebrow, amused. "Lady, I don't care what you threaten. You don't belong here." Those 5 words sliced deeper than anything else. "You don't belong here." Marcus moved to stand between them. "Step back, man." Derek held firm. "You interfering. Now I'm protecting a client," Marcus said, holding his ground. Miles Rennick stood from the corner, holding his phone higher now. "This needs to be seen." Celeste's voice cracked. "Not from fear but fury. Miles, we don't need their eyes. We need their ears." Miles lowered his phone, swallowing hard. "Then say it louder." Celeste turned to Heather and spoke slowly. "You demand my history like I owe you my identity. But I don't owe this room anything. I've earned more than anyone in here, including you. So instead of asking where my money came from, maybe ask why you think you have the right to question it." At that moment, Anita Sharma's voice came through the phone in Celeste's hand, steady and deliberate. Celeste, Protocol 6 is now fully active. Starglade's compliance board has flagged Heather's employee record. They're pulling the 2023 audit logs. I've also linked Trevor's prior formal warning for verbal misconduct. One more incident, and corporate will suspend his client privileges. Celeste didn't smile. She just nodded. Let it all run. Heather leaned forward, almost growling. You won't get away with this. Celeste replied, You mean being black, wealthy, and patient? I've done it for 20 years. Stephen backed away from the cluster forming near Celeste's seat, mumbling, This is not what I signed up for. Brittany gripped the phone tighter as she continued speaking with dispatch, giving her name, clearly spelling out a possible financial criminal presence without irony. Clients around the lounge began to murmur louder. An elderly man near the window stood and shook his head. This is ridiculous, he said. A young black couple nearby took each other's hands. Then came the crack. Stephen's voice, low but clear. I need to say something. All eyes turned. Heather, Brittany, what we're doing is wrong. Heather's eyes went wide. Won't you dare? Stephen looked at the floor. Brittany wanted the police here. She didn't even run the verification. She refused to check the back end. She said bringing them in would shut her down fast. Brittany gasped. You liar. Stephen nodded once. I was there. You said it. And you said it knowing who she might be. Trevor shouted. You're turning on your team for her. She's bluffing. Celeste stood slowly, then called the bluff. She lifted her voice, finally powerful. I am Celeste Morgan, CEO of Morgan Capital Group, owner of Starglade Financial, and every second you've spent humiliating me in this room has been recorded, logged, and now witnessed. Clients around the lounge stared, frozen. Heather's face lost its color. Stephen didn't move. Brittany backed toward the wall. Derek blinked like he'd seen a ghost. Then it hit. The twist wasn't the reveal. It was the response. Clients started clapping slowly. Then all at once, Marcus stepped forward. I knew I'd seen you before. Forbes 2 years ago. Your company turned this bank around. Danielle stood, tears in her eyes. She's our CEO. Miles whispered. I should have filmed this part. Celeste looked around the room, her voice no longer calm but commanding. The problem wasn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is how you treated someone you thought didn't matter. Heather stammered. You set us up. Celeste answered. No, I tested you and you failed. The entire room shifted, and from the corner of the lounge, the sound of sirens grew faint in the distance. Police were coming, but the real justice had already walked through the front door. Detain her now before she disappears. Heather Langston's voice cracked with desperation as she pointed at Celeste. Eyes wild, posture no longer composed but combative. The tension in the private client lounge snapped. Derek Holt, the security lead, stepped forward without hesitation, reaching for Celeste's arm, as if dragging her away would undo the last 5 minutes of truth. But Celeste didn't move. She stood as if anchored to the floor itself. Touch me, and you'll lose more than your job, she said. Not loud but firm, steady and absolute. Danielle Avery stepped in between them before Derek's fingers could close. Back up, she shouted. You heard what she just said. She owns this place. Derek hesitated. He glanced at Heather, then back at Celeste. The growing uncertainty in his stance exposed the cracks beneath the uniform. At that moment, the double doors to the lounge pushed open, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Their boots echoed over the polished floor. A hush swept over the room. One officer, a white man in his 40s with a worn expression, raised a brow as his gaze met Celeste's. We got a report of a fraud attempt. Can someone tell us what's going on? Brittany Hayes stepped forward immediately, posture squared like she was proud of what she'd done. She's impersonating a high-net-worth client. She demanded $500,000 in cash with no verification. Her voice was sharp. This could be a federal-level theft. Celeste didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply turned toward the officer and said, I'd like to make a statement, but not yet. Before the officer could respond, the sound of a soft, cracking voice broke through the silence. "They're lying." Every head turned. It was Nia Thompson, a 24-year-old black woman in a denim jacket. Seated quietly near the frosted glass divider, she'd been silent until now. Small in posture, unnoticed. "They did it to me 2 weeks ago," she said, standing slowly. "I came in to open a photography business account. Brittany refused to run my EIN. She said we don't open accounts for freelancers with inconsistent histories." Brittany spun toward her. "That's not true." Nia raised her phone. "I recorded it. Didn't post it. But it's time someone did." Gasps echoed through the room. Derek took a single step back. One of the police officers turned to Brittany and asked, "Ma'am, did you make that call knowing she owns this bank?" Brittany's face lost its color. She didn't own it at the time," she stammered. Celeste turned slowly. "I've owned it for nearly 2 years, which means what you just said is either a lie or a confession." Miles Rennick lifted his phone again, but this time he didn't hit record. He just whispered. She didn't have to shout. She didn't need a camera. She is the camera now. Marcus Harlan looked to the officers and said, "Gentlemen, I think you're witnessing the end of a system, one that protected people like Brittany, Heather, and Trevor, and I think you know it too." The officer who had spoken earlier nodded slowly but noticeably. "We're not making any arrests, but we'll be writing a report. A full one." Anita Sharma's voice came through on Celeste's phone, calm and timely. "Celeste, corporate has received the Nia Thompson complaint. It was buried. Brittany flagged it as ineligible for review. That violates compliance policy 4.3. Celeste took a deep breath, eyes briefly closing. "Then it's official. This wasn't a case. It was a culture." Danielle reached out and touched Celeste's shoulder. "And you didn't just fight it. You broke it wide open." Nia, standing quietly with her phone pressed to her chest, added, "I came here to start a business, and somehow you gave me a future too." Celeste turned to her and smiled. "You still will, and this time you'll do it in a bank that actually sees you." She looked around one last time at the walls that had once contained prejudice, at the faces that now carried understanding, and then she spoke to all of them, to the cameraless world watching beyond that lounge. "Let this be the last time silence walks away stronger than truth. Let this be the moment we remember that justice doesn't come from hashtags. It comes from who we choose to be when no one's filming." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hand. I stood still and spoke clearly. "If I can do that here, then so can you wherever you are." And as she turned to lead the compliance officers into the branch's inner offices, Anita's final words echoed through the speaker. "Starglade Financial will never be the same." And that's exactly the point. The door closed softly behind them, but the message, the lesson, and the legacy stayed right there in the lounge where silence was finally broken for good. If you've ever been doubted, dismissed, or denied, let this story remind you. Your voice matters. Justice begins with truth. Subscribe, share, and stand with us, because the next story we tell might be yours.